Hunger killed the first man before anyone admitted the deliveries had stopped. This is the story of how German prisoners of war built their own food system when the supply chain collapsed, and why the camp records later claimed shortages never happened. Because something changed inside the wire, and no one ever explained how they survived. Spring 1945. A temporary Allied POW camp stretched across a muddy field near a damaged railway junction. Barbed wire fences, wooden guard towers, rows of overcrowded tents. Inside, thousands of German soldiers, captured quickly, processed quickly, stored quickly. The system was designed for movement, not permanence. Food arrived by truck and rail, canned rations, bread, powdered soup. Nothing generous, but enough to keep order. Then the war shifted. Rail lines were bombed, fuel shortages spread, convoys were reassigned to frontline units and civilian cities. Deliveries became irregular, then delayed, then smaller. At first, guards said nothing. But one morning, the kitchen fires did not start. And someone made a quiet decision that wasn't written down. The first change was subtle. Breakfast portions were cut, not officially, just quietly, ladles dipped less deeply, bread sliced thinner. No announcement. No explanation. Men noticed immediately. They didn't complain, because complaining meant attention, and attention meant being counted. By the third day, something strange appeared near the waste trench. 3 prisoners were sorting through discarded vegetable peels from the guard kitchen. No one stopped them. No one helped them. No one spoke about it. That night, the smell of boiling peel water drifted through one section of tents. Someone was already preparing for something worse. But the official ration board still listed full meals. And that was the first sign the system was no longer telling the truth. Days passed. The trucks came less often. When they did arrive, guards unloaded fewer crates than before, sometimes only flour, sometimes only canned meat, sometimes nothing but sacks marked for another camp. No one explained the shortages. Men began watching the supply gate instead of the horizon. Arrival became a ritual. If a truck came, the camp relaxed. If it didn't, the silence grew heavier. Inside the tents, new rules formed without discussion. No one ate everything at once. No one showed extra food. No one asked where someone else got theirs. Eye contact changed. Conversations shortened. At night, quiet scraping sounds came from the edges of the compound, digging, sorting, searching. Near the perimeter fence, small gardens appeared, not rows, not organized, just disturbed patches of earth where men pressed seeds stolen from kitchen scraps. Most of the plants died, but the digging continued, because the deliveries were no longer reliable, and hope had shifted from the gate to the ground. Then the routine broke. One section stopped lining up for meals. At first, guards assumed illness. But the men in that block weren't weak. They were working, carrying buckets, moving crates, hauling something heavy from the waste area toward a corner hidden by supply tents. The next morning, the official kitchen reported missing fuel. Yet cooking smoke rose from behind the storage sheds. No one had permission. No one was stopped. A guard later wrote that he was told they're managing it. But there was no order authorizing any prisoner operation. Then one more detail appeared. The camp garbage pit was suddenly empty. Completely clean. Food waste, bones, spoiled rations, all gone. And yet, the official ration amounts had not increased. Something was happening inside the camp. Something organized. And it wasn't part of the Allied system. Months later, a single piece of paper was found in a supply archive. It wasn't an official report. It wasn't stamped. It wasn't signed by any Allied officer. Just a folded sheet written in pencil, edges worn from handling. At the top were 4 quiet words. Internal distribution, block system. No one ever explained how it got there. And what it described was never mentioned in any official camp record. The list didn't look important at first. No weapons. No escape plans. No resistance activity. Only items the official system considered useless. Potato peels. Carrot tops. Bread crumbs swept from tables. Burned bone fragments. Spoiled flour dried and resifted. Animal feed recovered from nearby farms. Wood scraps taken from broken crates. But next to each item were numbers. Weights. Collection times. Block assignments. Distribution priorities. This wasn't scavenging. It was accounting. Someone inside the camp had rebuilt a supply system, and they were running it quietly. Witness accounts later described how it began. Not with a meeting, not with a plan, but with a moment no one spoke about. A medical orderly noticed 3 men collapse in the same week. Not from wounds, not from illness, from weakness. The official ration was still listed as adequate, but bodies were saying otherwise. So the orderly did something small. He redirected the bread crusts left after surgery meals. No announcement, no permission, just a quiet adjustment. That decision never appeared in any report. But others noticed, and the system began to grow. Former quartermasters were the first to organize it. Men who had managed army supply chains before capture. They understood something most prisoners didn't. Food wasn't just about quantity. It was about flow, collection, storage, timing, loss control. Every block was assigned collectors. Kitchen workers saved waste instead of discarding it. Peels were washed and boiled into thick broth. Bones were crushed and simmered again for fat. Spoiled flour was dried near stoves and sifted through cloth. Nothing was thrown away. Nothing. Because by then, everyone understood something the official board didn't show. Deliveries could stop again. At any time. Then came the part no one expected. The gardens. At first, guards assumed the disturbed soil near the fence was digging for escape. But there were no tunnels. Only small, shallow plots. Seeds came from kitchen scraps. Potato eyes. Carrot tops. Even grain spilled from transport sacks. Most of the plants failed. The soil was poor. The water scarce. But some survived. And those that did were carefully harvested, not eaten immediately, but replanted. The goal wasn't a meal. The goal was continuity. One account described something even more unusual. At night, near the outer fence, a small group of prisoners worked quietly under guard observation. No alarms. No warnings. Because the guards knew. And they chose not to interfere. On the other side of the fence, a local farmer sometimes left sacks near a broken fence post. Potatoes, turnips, animal feed. In exchange, prisoners had repaired his damaged irrigation ditch weeks earlier. No official agreement. No written permission. No report. Because acknowledging it would mean admitting the camp could no longer feed itself. So everyone pretended the exchange didn't exist. Inside the camp, distribution followed strict priorities. Medical tents received the first share. Men who could no longer stand were fed before labor teams. Workers handling waste and kitchens received slightly larger portions, not as a reward, as maintenance, because if they collapsed, the entire system would fail. It was no longer charity. It was logistics. Cold, efficient, necessary. One surviving memory described the moment the network proved it was working. A delivery convoy failed to arrive for 3 consecutive days. The official kitchen served only thin soup. No bread, no meat, no supplements. But that night, smoke rose from 3 separate areas behind the storage sheds. Hidden stoves made from oil drums. Inside them, broth thickened with crushed vegetables, bone fat, and reprocessed grain. The portions were small, but they existed. And for the first time, some men slept without the sharp edge of hunger. No one celebrated. No one spoke about it. Because the system only worked if it stayed invisible. That invisibility mattered. If the command structure noticed full independence, they might shut it down. Unauthorized food handling meant sanitation risks, disease risk, loss of control. So the network hid itself. Collection happened during official cleanup. Distribution happened after lights out. Storage was spread across multiple blocks to avoid detection. Even the inventory sheet found later had no names. No signatures. Only numbers. Only movement. Only survival. Then came the quiet realization. This wasn't temporary. The system had existed for weeks, possibly months, and according to several accounts, similar systems had formed in other camps before this one. Different locations, different guards, same pattern. When official supply weakened, prisoners rebuilt it. Every time, without orders, without recognition, without records. One former guard later described what he saw. They were thinner, still weak, but the panic stopped. That's when we knew they had figured something out. He never filed a report, because the camp looked stable again. And stability meant fewer problems. But the most unsettling detail came from the medical logs. Cases of severe collapse decreased, even during weeks when official ration totals were lowest. The numbers didn't match the deliveries. They matched something else, something unofficial, something unrecorded. And that was the hidden event. Not a riot, not an escape, not a rebellion. Something quieter, more dangerous to the official story. The prisoners hadn't waited for the system to recover. They had replaced it. And once that happened, control inside the wire no longer belonged entirely to the people outside it. Weeks passed. Then the deliveries returned. At first slowly, a single truck, then another, bread crates stacked higher, meat tins reappeared, flour shipments arrived on schedule again. From the outside, the crisis looked over. The kitchens burned steadily. The ration board showed full portions. The official system was working again. But inside the camp, something had already changed. And it didn't change back. The first sign was quiet. Even after normal meals resumed, prisoners continued collecting scraps. Bread crusts were still hidden. Vegetable peels were still saved. Bones were still boiled again at night. No one gave the order. No one needed to. Because the memory of empty kitchens had become stronger than the presence of full ones. And no one trusted the deliveries anymore. Camp staff noticed the behavior almost immediately. One inspection report mentioned Unauthorized retention of food waste observed in multiple blocks. Another noted improvised cooking devices discovered behind storage area. But enforcement was inconsistent. In some sections, guards dismantled the stoves. In others, they walked past them. Because something unexpected had happened during the shortage. Discipline had improved. Fewer fights. Fewer theft reports. Fewer medical emergencies. The underground system had reduced panic. And panic was the real threat to camp control. So the rules remained flexible. Officially strict. Practically selective. Then came the paperwork changes. The kitchen ledger was replaced. The new version recorded only issued supplies, not waste, not leftovers, not internal redistribution. One entire month from the previous ledger was missing. No explanation. No replacement pages. Just a gap. Later audits would show delivery totals that didn't match transport records. Some shipments appeared twice. Others never appeared at all. But the final numbers showed one thing clearly. Adequate nutrition maintained. That conclusion mattered. Because if the records showed shortages, responsibility would move up the chain. And no one wanted that. Medical reporting changed too. Instead of malnutrition, new entries used softer language. General weakness. Fatigue-related condition. Temporary nutritional decline. The meaning was the same. But the words were safer. And safer words meant fewer questions. One doctor later admitted privately, "We treated hunger, but officially hunger did not exist." Then a new protocol appeared. All food handling must occur under guard supervision. All cooking limited to authorized kitchen areas. All waste to be disposed of immediately. The order looked strict, but in practice, it changed very little. Because enforcing it fully would expose something uncomfortable. The camp had survived its worst period without full control from the command structure. And that fact was never meant to be documented. So inspections became predictable. Certain blocks were checked. Others were ignored. Some stoves were confiscated. Others were quietly left alone. The system continued. Just below the surface, one officer recorded a private observation that never entered official files. If we remove their internal organization, we remove their stability. That sentence explained everything. The prisoner network wasn't just about food anymore. It was maintaining order, reducing fear, preventing unrest. In a strange way, the unofficial system had become part of camp control, even though it didn't belong to the authorities. And no one wanted to admit that. Then something else began to disappear. The people who had organized the network. The former quartermasters were reassigned to labor units. Kitchen workers were rotated frequently. Block leaders were transferred between sections. Officially, this was routine management. But the timing was unusual. Because stable systems don't like independent centers of authority. Even quiet ones. Even useful ones. Especially useful ones. Yet the behavior didn't stop. Collection continued. Hidden storage continued. Night cooking continued. Because by then, the knowledge had spread. The system no longer depended on individuals. It depended on habits. And habits are harder to control than people. One final detail appeared months later. A supply audit requested the original internal distribution document. It could not be located. No record of destruction. No transfer note. No archive entry. Just gone. And no one ever asked for it again. On paper, the camp had remained fully supplied. On paper, no independent food network had existed. On paper, control had never left official hands. But inside the wire, everyone understood the difference between the written system and the real one, because the real system was the one that worked when the tracks stopped. And after that experience, both prisoners and staff shared the same unspoken understanding. Order in the camp no longer depended only on authority. It depended on what people were willing to ignore. And sometimes, control is strongest not when rules are enforced, but when certain things are quietly allowed to exist. Years later, the story remained unspoken. Not in archives, not in official reports, not in histories printed in classrooms. Yet the memory lingered in the men who survived. Even after regular deliveries resumed and the camp returned to its official routines, habits formed during the crisis persisted. Bread crusts were still hidden. Vegetable peels were still washed and boiled again. Small garden plots were still planted at the edge of tents. It wasn't about necessity anymore. It was about control, about knowing, deep in the bones, that the system could fail at any moment and that survival might depend entirely on what you could do for yourself. Former prisoners recounted quietly how those weeks had changed them. One man, decades later, remembered. Once you've seen the shelves empty, once you've gone to bed hungry with nothing official to rely on, you never trust the system the same way again. Not fully. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't greed. It was instinct. A lesson painfully learned. Survival often requires rewriting the rules yourself, even if those rules contradict authority. The moral discomfort comes from recognizing what had really happened. Thousands survived not because the Allied system delivered efficiently, but because a group of prisoners quietly replaced it. The camp looked orderly on paper. Statistics showed sufficient rations. But the real work, the work that prevented collapse, starvation, and chaos, had been invisible. Unrecorded, unacknowledged. Even guards and officers who witnessed the network never fully reported it. Some admitted later it had prevented disease, unrest, even deaths. Some recognized that the prisoners' clandestine system had become an unofficial pillar of camp order. And yet, in the formal narrative, it didn't exist. It had been erased. The quiet reveal is this: human systems fail, orders fail, supply lines fail. But human ingenuity persists. And sometimes, the only way to survive is to build your own structure, even beneath the radar of authority. The POWs learned more than survival. They learned self-reliance, trust in their own resourcefulness, and the delicate power of invisible networks. They became the system. The final moral tension lies in the aftermath. Those same men returned home after the war, carrying habits formed in silence. They hoarded food, organized small caches, and trusted in their own foresight before any external authority. It was practical, it was adaptive, and it was a subtle, lasting scar of moral compromise. Because survival had required bending rules, hiding truth, and taking what was never officially theirs, not just food, but control itself. The last lingering thought. Sometimes history remembers the written rules. Sometimes it remembers the statistics. But real survival, it belongs to the quiet, unseen actions. The invisible networks. The people who stepped forward when no one else would. And those who learned, in hunger and fear, that order doesn't come from authority. It comes from the courage to act when everything official has failed.